It happened when my daughter, Emma, who was nearing her due date, suddenly doubled over in pain from labor. Out of nowhere, my grandson, John, threw a bucket of ice water on her. The splash echoed in the room, and for a few seconds, everything went silent. Emma's clothes were soaked, water dripping onto the floor. It didn't seem like an accident. John appeared to have deliberately thrown the cold water. Stunned by the unexpected act, my husband and I were left speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened before our eyes. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" I scolded him, but John just stood there, still holding the bucket, looking confused, as if he had no idea why he was being yelled at. Then, what came out of John's mouth next was almost too shocking to believe.
"But Daddy always says, it's a spell to make Mommy feel better."
What did you just say?
Though my husband and I were both taken aback, we didn't have time to focus on John's explanation at that moment. John, looking worried for Emma, who was clutching her stomach in pain, seemed like he was about to cry. What on earth was John thinking when he did that? It wasn't the kind of prank that could be dismissed so easily, and he didn't seem so young as to pull a stunt like that at such a crucial time. After Emma safely gave birth and regained her strength, I brought up the incident. By the way, about what happened before we left for the hospital. What exactly did John mean? Emma looked at me, her face clouded with discomfort. She seemed hesitant to speak, but, seeing the seriousness in my eyes, realized she could no longer hide it.
Mom. Actually.
My name is Nancy. I live with my husband, Jason. Both of us are retired and enjoying peaceful days together.
Nancy, shall we head out soon?
Now that we're in our late 60s, even a short outing leaves us more fatigued, and I notice myself getting out of breath after climbing stairs. We've been careful about our diet, but improvements haven't come easily. So, in an effort to combat our physical decline, we recently started going to the gym together. When you think of a gym, you usually picture younger people, but after doing some research, we found that there are plenty of gyms catering to seniors. In fact, when we go, we see a lot of people around our age. We started going when the mornings and evenings were still chilly, but now that the heat has become intense, we've settled into a routine. As we arrived at the gym and were about to begin our usual workout, we spotted a familiar face. "Oh, Casey, good morning. How are you today?"
Nancy. Jason. Good morning. I'm feeling great today. Ready to get some exercise in.
Casey is around our age, and we often enjoy small talk whenever we see each other. We first became acquainted when we were struggling with the gym equipment in the beginning, and Casey kindly showed us how to use it. Since then, we've become good friends, discussing everything from our workout routines to small happenings in our lives. Chatting with always cheerful, smiling Casey gives us a boost of energy. At this age, life tends to fall into a predictable routine, and new friendships are rare. But ever since we took up going to the gym, we feel like we've found a new way to enrich our days. We enjoyed our chat with Casey and continued with our workout.
Nancy, shall we head to Emma's house soon?
After having lunch and resting a bit, We had come to the gym, but before we knew it, the heat of the day had started to ease. Our daughter Emma, who is currently pregnant with her second child, lives nearby. With her due date approaching, we plan to visit her today to check on her. After working out at the gym, we made our way to Emma's house. As we rang the doorbell, the sound of little footsteps running toward the door echoed from inside.
Welcome. Mommy, Grandma and Grandpa are here.
Since it was a Sunday, I assumed he had the day off from daycare. Our grandson John greeted us with a big smile. He has Emma's gentle eyes and is an affectionate, charming child. Looking past John, I saw Emma, walking slowly with her large belly, making her way to the door.
Dad, Mom. Thanks for coming. How have you been?
Of course, we've been doing great. We went to the gym together again today. I know that being pregnant while raising a young child can be quite challenging, but Emma always welcomes us warmly whenever we visit and is thoughtful and kind. Her belly had grown much larger since we last saw her. We were eagerly awaiting the arrival of another grandchild. I suddenly realized that Emma's husband, Harrison, was nowhere to be seen, even though it was the weekend. He must have gone out somewhere. By the way, Emma, is Harrison at the slots again? Emma replied with a vague smile.
Yes. I think he should be back soon.
According to Emma, her husband Harrison is an elite employee who climbed to an important position at a young age. He's highly valued by his superiors and well-liked by his subordinates. At work, he has the reputation of being a good father, but on the other hand, he has a fondness for gambling and spends most of his days off at the slot machines. Harrison's gambling habit often comes up as a concern in conversations between my husband and me. It's hard to believe that with another baby due any day, he's constantly leaving his wife and young child to go play slots. Does he have any sense of responsibility as a father? Seeing Emma's ambiguous expression, I let out a small sigh. My husband must have felt the same way. He looked at Emma with a mixture of worry and frustration.
Is it really okay for him to be going to the slots while you're pregnant? Is he helping out with raising John?
Exactly. You know you can always rely on us if anything happens. Even though Emma now has her own family, she's still our precious daughter. If she's going through a tough time, we want to do everything we can to help. She's more than welcome to come back home if needed. Out of genuine concern, I tried to offer my support, but Emma just shook her head.
I'll be fine.
When she says that, it's hard to press the matter further. Every couple has their own way of doing things, and it's probably not right for us to interfere too much. After that, we sat in the living room, sipping tea and catching up on each other's lives. Emma mentioned that John recently started attending a programming class. Though my husband and I aren't very familiar with computers, Emma explains that programming is now a mandatory part of school education and has become a popular extracurricular activity. Apparently, programming classes are more expensive than other activities, but with an elite father like Harrison, it makes sense. What a child is learning often becomes a topic of conversation at work. It seems that it was Harrison who suggested John take up programming. John, for his part, is enjoying the class and proudly told us all about what he's learning and what he can do now. Watching John excitedly talk about it, I couldn't help but wonder if Harrison, who's always out at the slots, was really paying attention to his son's stories. After we'd been talking for a while, I heard the sound of a car door shutting outside. It seemed that Harrison had finally come back from the slots.
I'm home. Oh, hello.
When Harrison entered the living room, he barely glanced at us before trying to head straight to his room without much conversation. His irritated expression and the way he slammed the door behind him made it clear that his time at the slots hadn't gone well. He acted this way even with us, his in-laws, in the house. One could only imagine how much worse his behavior was when we weren't around. I noticed John clinging close to Emma, carefully watching Harrison's mood. It gave me a glimpse into what things were usually like in this household. Seeing how pitiful Emma looked, I couldn't hold back any longer and decided to speak up. "Hold on, Harrison. My daughter is about to give birth. Don't you think you should be spending more time supporting her instead of going to the slots? Having a grumpy husband around at such an important time must be stressful for Emma and the baby." My comment must have hit a nerve because Harrison, with his high and mighty pride, immediately snapped back at me.
This is a matter between me and my wife. I don't think you have any right to interfere.
How dare you?
Honestly, you're too overprotective. It's the second child. You're worrying way too much.
Excuse me? Raising a young child while pregnant is incredibly hard. My anger only grew at Harrison's lack of understanding, and as his temper flared, our argument became more heated. My husband tried to intervene, but both Harrison and I were too worked up to stop. Emma, clearly frightened, stood frozen, saying nothing. In the end, Harrison shoved me in his fit of rage. Ow! I twisted my ankle as I fell. The pain was sharp, and I couldn't stand up. Even seeing me in pain, Harrison didn't apologize. He just shot us a cold glare before storming back to his room. Emma stood there, pale and flustered, unable to do anything but watch us. At my age, even minor injuries take longer to heal. I worried about losing strength if I couldn't move for a while. With my husband's help, I left Emma's house and went straight to the hospital. On the way there, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Even as Harrison and I argued, she remained silent, never once stepping in to mediate. My once kind and outspoken daughter. Why had she changed? Had I gone too far? As I replayed the events in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling of sadness and discomfort at her lack of response. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with a sprain. When the doctor asked how it happened, I gave a vague explanation. As expected, my recovery was slower than it would have been in my younger days, and I had to spend a few weeks resting and visiting the hospital regularly. Fortunately, I recovered enough to return to the gym after a few weeks. When I finally went back, I saw Casey, still as dedicated as ever to her workouts. She was surprised when I told her about my injury and expressed a lot of concern. That day, I did a light workout, and afterward, my husband and I decided to visit Emma's house again for the first time since the injury. The last time we saw her, It had been warm enough to break a sweat with just a short walk, but now, the heat had subsided, and the cool autumn breeze felt refreshing. As usual, John and Emma greeted us when we arrived, but once again, there was no sign of Harrison. Apparently, he had gone out to play slots again. To be honest, I was relieved that Harrison wasn't there. It was still awkward between us, and I was worried another argument might break out.
Mom, Dad, it's been a while. I'm really sorry about last time. I'm glad your injury has healed.
Though she had already apologized over WhatsApp, she said she wanted to say it in person. It wasn't Emma's fault at all, but seeing her apologize with such a sad expression made my heart ache. I hadn't received any apology, either by phone or WhatsApp, from Harrison, the one who had caused the injury. I couldn't help but worry whether my daughter would be okay living with him. We barely finished our greetings when Emma went into the kitchen to prepare tea. Suddenly, she crouched down, clutching her stomach in pain. The contractions seemed irregular, but her due date was approaching. It could be the start of labor. This is serious. Can you get the car, dear? Let's take Emma to the hospital right away. Flustered by the sudden turn of events, we started preparing to rush her to the hospital. But at that moment, out of nowhere, John dumped a bucket of ice-cold water on Emma. The splash echoed in the room, followed by a stunned silence. Emma's clothes were soaked, and the water dripped onto the floor. We stood there, mouths agape, not sure what had just happened. Emma looked utterly shocked. It was clear that John had deliberately thrown the water. This wasn't an accident. Hey! What are you doing? I scolded, but John just stood there holding the bucket, looking bewildered, as if he didn't understand why he was being reprimanded. What he said next was almost unbelievable.
But Daddy always says, it's a magic spell to make Mommy feel better.
What did you say?
My husband and I were too shocked to process John's words, but we didn't have time to delve into it. Emma and the baby were our priority. After Emma quickly changed clothes, we rushed to the hospital. John, seeing his mother in pain, looked like he was about to cry. What was John's behavior all about? It didn't seem like a mere prank. It was too extreme, especially given the timing. And Emma's reaction when she was doused with cold water also bothered me. The car ride to the hospital was filled with a mixture of worry for Emma and confusion about John's actions. Even though it was her second child, childbirth is always a life-threatening ordeal. For a while, I feared the worst, but Emma eventually gave birth safely to a beautiful, healthy baby who looked just like her. Emma lay in bed, utterly exhausted. I didn't want to burden her so soon after giving birth, but once she had rested a bit, I couldn't hold back anymore. By the way, before we left for the hospital, what exactly did John mean by what he said? Emma looked at me with a pained expression. She seemed unsure whether she should tell me, but seeing how serious I was, she probably realized she couldn't keep it hidden any longer.
Mom, the truth is...
The story Emma slowly began to share was nothing short of shocking. When Emma and Harrison first got married, he was kind to her and even cut back on the gambling habits he had before the marriage. However, as his work became busier, he fell back into gambling. Around that time, Harrison began to take his frustrations out on Emma when his gambling didn't go well. He became harsh, especially when Emma, struggling with morning sickness, couldn't keep up with the housework. Instead of helping, he would berate her, saying things like,
Why can't you do it?
or,
You're useless.
he even resorted to physical violence. This wasn't a one-time incident. It happened repeatedly. Just like the time John suddenly poured cold water on Emma, Harrison would frequently douse her with cold water while yelling at her. It turns out Harrison had been abusing Emma regularly. John once tried to stop Harrison, but Harrison told him,
When I do this, it makes Mommy feel better. It's not a bad thing.
John, being so young and impressionable, believed his father. Over time, the constant barrage of negative words drained Emma's will to resist, and she lived in fear. She hadn't told us any of this because she didn't want to worry us or cause trouble. It wasn't until John copied Harrison by pouring cold water on her that Emma realized how harmful this was for their son as well. But at this point, Emma and Harrison were no longer equals in the relationship. She knew that if she spoke up, it would only provoke more violence. After enduring such mistreatment for so long, it was no surprise that Emma couldn't stand up to him. Who knows what might happen if she did? While protecting her unborn child and caring for John, Emma had to endure the abuse. It must have been unbearable. She seemed completely at her wit's end. Hearing all this, I was struck by a realization. The day I had an argument with Harrison, Emma watched with fear in her eyes. She wasn't just frightened by the argument. She was terrified because of the abuse she had been enduring. How could I have missed that? I deeply regretted not asking more questions when I sensed something was off. How could he? This is absolutely unforgivable. While Emma was in the hospital, we took care of John. I couldn't help but resent Harrison for not even taking care of his own son during such a time. Even after Emma gave birth, Harrison only briefly showed up at the hospital, offering no words of kindness, and then immediately left for home. Furious about the way Harrison had been treating my daughter, I decided to confront him. Thankfully, today he hadn't gone out to the slot machines. At first, he pretended not to be home, but I knew he was there because his car was parked outside. After ringing the doorbell multiple times, he finally opened the door with an exasperated look on his face.
What do you want? Emma's at the hospital, right?
By now, even Harrison spoke to us with rude, dismissive words. Harrison, what's going on here? I asked, telling him that I knew about the abuse Emma had been enduring and insisting that he stop immediately for the sake of both Emma and John. Despite how serious I was, Harrison just smirked and refused to listen. Worse, he even threatened me.
Enough already! Do you want me to hurt you again?
He raised his voice, growing more and more aggressive, as if he were about to hit me. I realized there was no reasoning with him. Continuing the argument would only put me in danger. I decided it would be best to back down for the moment. After somehow calming the situation, I walked home with a heavy heart. As I walked, I thought about what I should do next. I had told Harrison what Emma had confided in me. When she returned home, it was certain she would face even worse treatment from him. I had to find a solution before she was discharged from the hospital. But no matter how terrible he was, Harrison was still Emma's husband. I considered going to the police, but getting them involved would mean explaining everything in detail. With the neighbors watching, it would inevitably cause trouble for Emma. It seemed too harsh to burden her with more stress, especially after just giving birth. Feeling lost, my husband and I sought advice from Casey during a trip to the gym. I had once heard Casey mention having a daughter around the same age as Emma, so I thought he might offer some insight on how to resolve this situation. Despite it being such a personal matter, Casey listened intently, occasionally wincing at the awful details, nodding in sympathy.
That's a horrible story. I'd love to see this guy's face. What kind of man is he?
I showed Casey a photo from Emma's wedding on my phone. In the picture, Emma smiled so brightly, something that seemed unimaginable now. I remembered how happy I had been when she told us she wanted to marry someone, and how our whole family celebrated. Early in their marriage, Harrison and Emma often visited us, and we'd chat over tea, discussing nothing in particular. Back then, Harrison was thoughtful, checking on our health and even driving us when we needed to go somewhere. We had a good impression of him. But then, he stopped coming around. It was only Emma who would visit us after that. It was around that time when Emma mentioned that Harrison had always been a gambler and had recently gotten hooked again. I sighed as I looked at the photo, wondering how it had come to this. What would Casey think, seeing this picture? When I looked up, I noticed something startling. Casey, who was always smiling, now had a face filled with shock and anger. I had never seen such an expression on him before. Just as I was at a loss for words, Casey said something astonishing.
I know this guy.
It turned out that Harrison was someone Casey knew. What were the chances of such a coincidence? It really is a small world. We were stunned and asked how they knew each other, but Casey only gave vague answers. Then, he offered to come with us to talk to Harrison, and we agreed. So, a few days later, we visited Harrison together with Casey. To be honest, I felt uneasy about visiting Harrison again. But with Casey, someone who knew him and was a neutral third party, I felt reassured. I believed that Harrison wouldn't act out of line with Casey there. I rang the doorbell at Emma's house. It seemed that Harrison was home again today. From the intercom, I heard Harrison's irritable voice.
Yes? What do you want?
I told him that I wanted to talk again. He replied that he had nothing to say to us, but today, I couldn't back down. Emma would be discharged from the hospital soon. I couldn't leave until Harrison genuinely repented and promised never to commit domestic violence against her again. Determined, I repeatedly pressed the doorbell until, after a while, Harrison reluctantly opened the door.
What is it? Enough already.
The moment he saw our faces, Harrison spat out insults and acted arrogantly, but suddenly his words stopped short. Wondering what had happened, I looked at his face and saw his eyes fixed on Casey. His expression changed dramatically, and Harrison's face quickly turned pale.
President! What are you doing here?
To our surprise, Casey was the president of Harrison's company. I remembered Emma once mentioning that Harrison's work had reached the president's ears and that he had high expectations for him. The Casey we had been chatting with at the gym was the very president Emma had talked about.
What on earth have you been doing?
Casey scolded Harrison with an intense fury. Harrison, whom the company had entrusted with its future, wasn't just neglecting his family, he was abusing his wife. It was no wonder Casey was furious.
I'm so sorry.
With a pale face, Harrison bowed deeply and apologized to Casey.
There's no point in apologizing to me. You should be apologizing to Emma and Nancy for the trouble you've caused them.
The once prideful Harrison was now utterly crushed. His arrogance was nowhere to be seen. We received an apology from Harrison. Led by Casey, Harrison went to apologize to Emma for his actions as well. Whether it was sincere or not, being rebuked by the president of his company made it unlikely that Harrison would ever commit domestic violence against Emma again. I was truly relieved. Word of Harrison's abuse spread throughout the company, leading to his demotion. Abandoned by his president, his prospects for promotion became hopeless. Unable to handle the shame from his colleagues, Harrison eventually quit the company. Afterward, Emma divorced Harrison. Although she had felt helpless and lacked the energy to fight back due to the abuse, hearing about Casey's intervention gave her the courage to move forward. They went to court over custody, but with Harrison having neglected his family and pushed all the child-rearing and housework onto Emma, he didn't stand a chance. Emma gained custody of the children and received child support from Harrison.
Mom, Dad, thank you so much. Thanks to you, I'm able to live peacefully now.
Emma and her children returned to live with us, and our once quiet home became much livelier. Watching my grandchildren grow up each day brings me such joy. I'm deeply grateful to Casey, who helped save my daughter from domestic violence and brought this happiness into our lives. Even now, after the ordeal has settled down, Casey and I enjoy chatting whenever we see each other at the gym. I'm thinking of inviting him over for a small thank you dinner soon. Since Emma and the kids moved in, I've been helping with the childcare. However, the parenting norms today are vastly different from when I raised Emma, and I'm constantly learning new things. For example, in the past, it was said that holding a baby too much would spoil them, but now it's recommended to hold them as much as they want to meet their needs. Back then, we used to soften food for babies by chewing it before feeding them, but now it's discouraged because of the risk of passing on cavity-causing bacteria. With Emma's guidance, I'm rediscovering the joys of raising children. Emma's mood has also brightened considerably since she left Harrison. She's always been a cheerful and lively person by nature. I'm so glad to see her return to her true self. She mentioned how grateful she is that her children no longer have to tiptoe around Harrison and can live freely. Spring had arrived, and the cherry blossoms were in bloom, signaling the end of a long and painful autumn and winter for Emma. Recently, she told me that she's found someone who truly understands and supports her. He has been a source of comfort to her after the emotional toll of the divorce, and he adores the children as well. I can't help but hope that this time, Emma will build a happy family. That's the end of today's story. How did you like it? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.